Hey guys, this is my next video update on the Rhoa build that I'm doing. It's a full range Rhoa build, and this is an ongoing series of progress. And if you want the earlier parts on how I progress through the campaign and early endgame, there's also links in the video description for it. And before you go, oh my god, not another lightning spear build. This is a fully ranged Rhoa build, and I guess that's also fairly common. Many people use Rhoas in their build. This is a Rhoa build where you run a blazing fast plus 56% move speed, so you move through maps extremely quickly. And on top of this, you actually gain frenzy charges faster than you can use them. You actually gain roughly 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 6 frenzy charges each time you shoot your lightning spear. So unless you are blasting lightning spear like a machine gun, which obviously you really shouldn't, you'll never really run out of frenzy charges, so all your lightning spear attacks will be frenzy charge and powered. I'll leave another 10 seconds or so in this mapping highlight just so you can get a better feel on how this build performs. And like I say, it really reaches from one end to the map fairly quickly. And finally, here's a little bit of demo on how well the lightning spear can clear rooms. This build also excels at bossing because I'm using frenzy charged explosive spears. Because I maintain frenzy charges so well, you can actually let loose a salvo of empowered explosive spear from the start to the end of the fight. Here's a quick showcase on Citadel bosses.
I smell your blood.
And here is one against a pinnacle boss, Xesht. Note that this is only tier 3, I haven't done tier 4 yet, but I'm fairly confident that I should be able to do it and probably will attempt it in the near future. Hi, so now coming into the build, first I want to talk a bit on how this build generates frenzy charges, because the frenzy charges are key to let loose empowered attacks. It's a bit different between mapping and bossing, so starting off first with mapping. In mapping, there are two ways how this build generates frenzy charges. The first of which, of course, is combat frenzy that generates charges each time you freeze, electrocute, or pin. This build actually can both electrocute and freeze. For electrocution during mapping, I have Herald of Thunder, where I have the electrocute gem socketed to it along with Neural Overload. This allows Herald of Thunder to electrocute each time it procs. On top of this, on Lightning Spear, I actually also have Embitter. Embitter changes sources of extra damage of any other element type into cold. Because I'm equipping the Sacred Flame Shrine Scepter, this gives a ton of added damage as fire damage, which is then converted into cold damage on Lightning Spear. So the Embitter changes the fire damage into cold damage. This way, when I shoot Lightning Spear when I attack during mapping, I also freeze a couple of enemies, so I will be able to proc Combat Frenzy fairly consistently, although it's only once every 4 seconds or so. Because of the quality on Combat Frenzy, there's also a 20% chance that each time you proc it, you get 1 additional charge. So you either get 1 charge or 2 charge every 3 to 4 seconds or so. On top of this, during mapping, I also have Cast on Critical and Sniper's Mark. Sniper's Mark also has Profusion attached to it, so there's also a chance that Sniper's Mark will trigger 2 charges when I trigger cast on critical. Now this build is critical heavy, so in fact for Lightning Spear it has 100% critical hit chance, so main hand critical chance is 100%. Because I'm equipping Tangle Tongue, there's also a chance for a twice critical hit, and that chance is also 100%. And because on Lightning Spear I also have Fork. Fork allows additional forks after splitting, which not only allows the room clear, allows easier application of Sniper's Mark, and also allows more consistent crits to get charges. If that's not enough, on top of that, I also took the passive where I have a chance to generate maximum frenzy charges, and I can have a total of up to 6 charges. So as I'm blasting, I'm proccing Combat Frenzy, I'm proccing the Sniper's Mark, and I'm also proccing every once in a while Frenetic as well. So it allows almost near 100% uptime of frenzy charges. For bossing, it's a bit different because Herald of Thunder only procs when you kill a shocked enemy, so this will never come into play during bossing. So for bossing, we are relying solely on cast on critical Sniper's Mark. To make this very consistent, the concept of bossing used here is a 2-button bossing process, so I'm using both Stormlance and Explosive Spear for bossing. Now Stormlance's purpose here isn't really DPS. In fact, I will have almost no DPS support gems on Stormlance. So maybe the only one you can consider DPS is Martial Tempo. But the main reason why I put Martial Tempo is so that I can quickly lay down the Stormlance and then get back to Explosive Spear spamming. Now the purpose of Stormlance is sort of like your charge generator / debuffer. At the start of the fight, or if I run out of frenzy charges after throwing a ton of Explosive Spear, I lay down 2 to 3 Stormlance again. Stormlance will proc critical because they are constantly zapping the boss, and because they proc critical, they will always proc Sniper's Mark at least once every 2 seconds, but I also have Ingenuity to reduce the cooldown, so it should be more frequent than that. And therefore Stormlance with the Inhibitor support gem ensures that it continuously gives you frenzy charges that you then feed into Explosive Spear. One of the supports on Explosive Spear is Perpetual Charge, so sometimes 35% of the time Explosive Spear is empowered without actually eating the charge, and this allows more constant uptime as you have seen so far in the showcase. On top of that, as you are throwing a barrage of Explosive Spears on a boss, not forgetting also that Explosive Spear itself has a chance to critically hit, and therefore Explosive Spear itself can also trigger cast on critical Sniper's Mark. So it sustains itself a little bit, but because you are throwing it fairly fast, it does eat up the charges after a while, but it's not that big of an issue. You just throw down 2 or 3 more Stormlances, and then you restart the cycle again. So essentially you're just throwing Stormlance, throw Explosive Spear until you're out of charges, and then you throw Stormlance, and then you repeat into Explosive Spears again. So coming into the skill gem setup, a little bit of quick explanation, and there's also a link in the video description to the full build, so you can refer to that for every single gem that I use. First of all, for mapping, the 3 key support gems for Lightning Spear you want is obviously firstly Volt. Because of Volt, you only shoot out your Lightning Spear once every 2 to 3 seconds. Now, Volt is dependent not on time between shots, but more on distance traveled between shots. So because you have a very fast move speed with this build and you are on Rhoa mount, you can actually shoot Lightning Spear a little bit more frequently than other builds, and you should still get at least the 10 meter Volt bonus from it, which is really enough to clear the room. On top of this, you combine it with Fork. Fork is an excellent AoE, and although the extra Forks deals a little bit less bonus damage, the extra AoE more than makes up for it. So these 2 are really critical, and the third one that I think would be critical is actually Inevitable Critical itself. This is the support gem that gives Lightning Spear the ability to have 100% crit, which is really huge because I'm using Tangle Tongue. For the other two supports, you can use anything that you want. I use Embitter and Primal Armament. Embitter doesn't actually do any extra damage, it just freezes enemies, so you can actually have more DPS on your Lightning Spear. If you swap this with another DPS support gem, it could probably hit 70 to 80,000 as it is now, but I like the idea of being able to freeze enemies as well, so Embitter it is. And then Primal Armament is just my choice of damage on Lightning Spear, but you can use anything else, such as Deliberation or Long Shot or something else like that. Anything works well once you have the three main support gems in. For Combat Frenzy, there's nothing inside, and then for Cast on Critical, I actually would advocate to try to get a 5-link Cast on Critical. You can try to shop for it on the trade site, because it does make a big quality of life difference in maintaining charges. It can still work with 3-link or 4-links, in which case I would recommend to put in Sniper's Mark, Profusion, and Impetus to start off. And then once you get extra links, you add in Energy, Retention, and Ingenuity for cooldown. You can also slot in Inspiration here, but I rather just drink a Mana Flask, so I rather have all the rest of this in. But if you think mana cost is an issue, Inspiration can be slotted in over Ingenuity here. And then for bosses, like I said, it's a combination of Stormlance and Explosive Spear. Explosive Spear is the main DPS that I use for bossing, and I like to use Explosive Spear. Personally, I like the explosions it leaves behind, and I like this concept of bossing. Now, first of all, the thing to understand about Explosive Spear is that the Frenzy Charged version always leaves Burning Ground. And Burning Ground does come into effect here because I'm using Immolate. Immolate prevents the skill from igniting the boss, so the actual spear itself and the explosion it causes will never ignite, but it will still cause Burning Ground, and the Burning Ground can still ignite. So in other sense of the word, after the first Explosive Spear where you land the Burning Ground, every subsequent spear attack will get the 30% extra damage bonus, which is pretty huge. And because Explosive Spear no longer ignites, I then throw in Elemental Focus. Elemental Focus is more or less free 25% damage. The drawback is already on Immolate, so the can't inflict elemental ailments doesn't matter anymore. Perpetual Charge, as I mentioned earlier, this allows more uptime of Frenzy Charge Explosive Spear before you have to reset into Stormlance. And then Overextend is huge DPS here. The 30% more critical damage bonus is multiplicative with your current critical damage bonus. And because you are using Tangle Tongue, you have a chance of doubling your critical damage bonus through the Critical Fork. So I just go to Tangle Tongue. So Tangle Tongue forks critical hits, which is a pretty long explanation, but in other words, it says that your critical hit chance rolls twice per attack, and each time you roll a successful crit, you apply a critical damage bonus. So if both rolls happen to be critical, then you get to apply a critical damage bonus twice. And currently for Explosive Spear, I'm rocking 862% critical damage bonus, which I believe doesn't factor in some of the bonuses. I do have some conditional bonuses on my passive tree as well. For the generator Stormlance, so Stormlance first of all requires inhibitor. If you don't have inhibitor on Stormlance, it will start using the frenzy charges it generates, which is really besides the point. You don't want that to happen. So inhibitor is compulsory. I use this for shock support as well. So I have conduction to increase chance of shock. Shock is a good damage multiplier, and I have overcharge as well. The overcharge is a risky choice. This is already kind of like a glass cannon build. So if you don't want to sacrifice survivability, you can replace overcharge with something else. And then I also have meme for the added debuff. And then Martial Tempo is on Stormlance rather than Explosive Spear because there's no more space on Explosive Spear. I rather have concentrated effect here for damage. So Martial Tempo is on Stormlance just to allow quicker application so that I can switch back to Explosive Spear more quickly. For Herald of Thunder, Neural Overload and Electrocute is the go-to. Innervate for some nice bonus damage while mapping, and then Longshot just for damage, it's optional. Finally, for Infused Weapon in this build acts as a secondary debuffer. So first of all, why Fire Infusion? You'll be eating Frenzy charges, so by right you're actually doing more lightning damage, and in fact Fire Infusion leads to a little bit drop of DPS. The idea is that I already have the Sacred Flame Shrine Scepter. That offhand adds fire damage to all your attacks, including Infused Weapon. The point of having Fire Infusion is to boost the fire damage because I'm combining this with Ignition. Infused Weapon is my Ignite applicator as well. Now why do I want to do this when you already have Burning Ground from Explosive Spear? The main reason why I want to do this is Infused Weapon is my main source of applying fire exposure, and fire exposure only applies fire exposure itself when the attack ignites a target. So in other words, you want Infused Weapon to ignite and apply fire exposure. Fire exposure then combines with Strip Away to have more reduction of enemies' fire resistance. And on top of this, in my passive tree, I've also taken this passive right here. So I have 2 fire penetration and I have exposed to the Inferno, which not only gives me more fire penetration but allows fire exposure to reduce by an extra 5%. Now on top of that, there is also Blasphemy. Now Blasphemy here, the choice of curse is optional. You can use Temporal Chains or Enfeeble, those are great options as well, and gives you more survivability. I went for Flammability. This combines very nicely with fire exposure to further reduce the enemy's fire resistance. And then I just have Magnified Effect and Ritualistic Curse to have a bigger area of effect for Flammability. This way, even if I have to retreat to range, you can actually still apply Flammability from a fair distance away. Now, you might be thinking that reducing fire resistance is good mainly for Explosive Spear, but it actually does help Stormlance output more damage as well. Not forgetting the final line of text on Sacred Flame: enemies in your presence resist elemental damage based on their lowest resistance, which means that their Stormlance lightning damage will be rolling against the enemy's fire resistance, which is virtually 0 anyway. So the fire exposure boosts not only damage from Explosive Spear but also for Stormlance itself. Rhoa Mount is just the basic support gems, and Purity of Fire is currently bugged in the game where any supports you put in that require Spirit now no longer require Spirit if you put it into Purity of Fire. So feel free to slot in as many support Spirit gems as possible into this. Moving on to gear. Now gear, there are 2 uniques used here, Tangle Tongue and Sacred Flame. Now Tangle Tongue is really mandatory, and ideally you want a Tangle Tongue that's 19% above, as plus to critical hit chance, as well as having 2 sockets. The 2 sockets you put in Vision Runes for 220 accuracy, which then translates to additional flat damage through the Amazon Ascendancy. So this helps to make up for Tangle Tongue's low base damage. But the critical hit chance is really key, so as close to 20% is ideal, so mine isn't even the best. And even the intelligence roll, ideally you want above 20 because it does come into play here. But I'll cover more about the stats later. So Tangle Tongue is mandatory. Now Sacred Flame technically isn't mandatory. You can use another scepter that maybe even gives more spirit, but Sacred Flame makes up a lot of DPS and therefore allows you to forego a few DPS gems on Lightning Spear as well as Stormlance. If I take out my Sacred Flame, I lose a ton of DPS. So it's like almost half my DPS is gone. So it's really key to sustain DPS here. The gain X% of damage as extra fire damage is multiplicative with your current DPS, so it's pretty significant. A rare scepter, on the other hand, you can always find one that gives you damage, but it won't be as close to Sacred Flame. Moving on to additional spirit gear. Besides the Sacred Flame, you want to have 64 additional spirit. This can be in a combination across your helm, chest, and amulet. Unfortunately, I don't have a helm and chest with spirit, so I had to have all 64 spirit on the amulet itself. If you do have like a helm corrupted to give 20 spirit, for example, then your spirit demand on the amulet is smaller. But in other words, the spirit on these 3 pieces of gear, you want to total to minimum 64. 64 will allow you to equip the blasphemy as well as flammability. So this is the way to go. For armor, I also went for Falconer's Jacket. The main reason is because of the implicit of 5% increased move speed. Like I said, this build is a Rhoa speed build, so 5% increased move speed is desirable. You pair this with the boots, and you want boots with 35% move speed as well. The helm is an energy shield helm because I pair this with Subterfuge Mask passive on the passive tree. So this is the passive right here. This gives you 2 evasion rating per 1 energy shield on your helm. So therefore, with close to 370 energy shield, you actually get 740 evasion as well on top. So pretty nice defensive boost right there. For belt, just resistance and life. And then for rings, you actually want as much flat damage as you can, but in this build I actually would recommend to focus more on fire damage if possible. But otherwise, whatever source of flat damage you can get is good. And then you want to then get stats and or resistances for the suffixes. Now the stat wise requirement is very steep here. In fact, at the current version, I'm just barely meeting the stat requirements. You want 205 dexterity to be able to use level 20 spear skills. You want 151 intelligence, mainly because of my level 16 cast on crit. This can be lower if you use level 14 cast on crit. Unfortunately, I don't have a level 14 gem, so my int requirement is 151. And then finally, for strength, because of Sacred Flame, you need a minimum of 58 strength overall. So it is pretty stat heavy. That's why on my rings I have a couple of stat rolls. On my amulet I have plus 20 to all attributes. And then on my boots I have 25 to dexterity to help support the stats as well. To make things easier, you can actually roll a strength roll on the belt. And then if you still need more stats over on the passive tree, you can sacrifice 3 bonus points and then path from here to take plus 8 dexterity and plus 25 dexterity. So this gives you 33 extra dexterity to play with, and then another 2 points to come here and get another 8% dexterity, which should equate to close to 20 dexterity more. So you have 50 plus dexterity just by taking these points. And if you do need the points or you do need the stats, then this is what I would recommend to go for. Otherwise, it's better to just go for the minimum stats required and go for crit bonuses whenever possible. Finally, coming to the passive tree. So for passive tree, you want infused weapon, you want critical strike and penetrate for Tangle Tongue, and then you want predatory instinct. This is actually a huge DPS gain when they have the open weakness. If you happen to get a double crit on explosive spear, you see the bosses drop a huge chunk of their life. In fact, probably like 20, 30, 40% of their life in one big double critical. So if the stars align, this is pretty good overall. For the passive tree, there are two things that I focus on. First is move speed. This is why I went here at the start. This few nodes gives you quite a lot of move speed. And then there's move speed over here. And then there's move speed over here. And then there's move speed over here as well. And then there's move speed over here as well. There's actually one more move speed node that I unfortunately can't take. There's one more right here. But it's a bit too out of the way, and you know, it doesn't give you much else besides move speed. Projectile speed and projectile damage isn't actually very good here. You don't really need too much of it, so I choose to forego this one. Besides move speed, I went also for crits. So crit chance base is very important because the critical strike here that boosts your base crit based on your accuracy also works off your base crit. So because of Tangle Tongue having a high base crit, and then you further amplify your base crit with all these critical nodes, you have a much easier time to hit close to 90 or 100% critical strike chance. And because you're using Tangle Tongue, critical strike bonus is key, so you want key critical strike bonus nodes such as Throat Seeker, as well as Cooked, as well as your gems. Now for gems, you want Time Lost Emeralds, ideally with double notables, one that increases for attack damage, critical damage based on attack damage, and it's actually possible to get another roll that gives you 10% critical damage for spears. If you get both of them, this is pretty huge. Unfortunately, I only managed to get one, but you can see there's already quite a lot of notables that I'm hitting here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 notables here. So with a large radius to this gives me 50% critical damage bonus, and if you have critical damage bonus for spears, this can actually be 100%, but that's an extremely expensive jewel to buy. This is also similar, although for this is optional. I have critical damage for attack damage and spears here, but unfortunately the radius is small, so I decided to just pop it here to hit 3 nodes. So that's a pretty nice hefty boost to crit. And then over here, finally, you just want critical damage bonus for attack damage and spears as high as possible. So on a normal emerald, this can roll up to 20% each, so potentially up to 40% crit, which is really good. For defenses, you want to try to boost both evasion rating and energy shield, so this is one big one. Subterfuge Mask is another one, but besides this, my play is currently a little bit more on the glass cannon side, so 1009 life and 1340 energy shield. So that's it for this video. I hope it's been helpful, and if you enjoy the content, do leave a like and subscribe. Until then, I'll catch you guys in the next progression video update. Bye!